Okay. I think we can go ahead and get started. Okay, so welcome everyone to this panel put on by the Engineering Biology Research Consortium Student and Postdoc Association, of which I am a member. And if you are not a member, I would encourage you to check it out. I will drop a link to application and to our website into the chat momentarily. But before we do that, I'd like to get into our panel discussion for today. So we have a great lineup of faculty that have joined us to give their perspectives on teaching, and also for your applications to be a faculty member and sort of how to approach that. And so I'll let each of the faculty on this panel introduce themselves, starting with Alex.
Hi, my name is Alex Prybutok. I'm an assistant teaching professor at the University of Washington in the Department of Chemical and just Chemical Engineering, Chemical and Biologicals, Northwestern. I just started 2 years ago, so this is my third year. My pronouns are she, her, and then I think that's all the intro things I need. Okay, cool.
Awesome. I'm Ashty Karim. I'm from Northwestern University. I'm an assistant professor here, starting my group this year. And I am in the Department of Chemical and Biological Engineering. And for the last 4 years, I was a research assistant professor. The last 2, I was served as the director of research for our Center for Synthetic Biology. And through these experiences, I was actually able to do some teaching and development of some educational resources in how you teach synthetic biology at different levels. And so that was through an NSF-funded training program. And we recently published a paper in Nature Communications on this new way of teaching synthetic biology that I'm sure throughout the panel I'll have an opportunity to share with you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Melissa Takahashi. I am an assistant professor at Cal State Northridge in the Department of Biology. Just in case you didn't know, so Cal State Northridge is kind of more of an undergraduate focused institution. We do have a small master's program, but we don't have any PhD students. And so it is a kind of a teaching focused university, but I do have a small research lab.
Did Terry freeze?
No, so I was just waiting.
We were so still. Okay, go.
My name's Terry Johnson. I'm senior instructional professor, molecular engineering, U Chicago, emeritus teaching professor of bioengineering at UC Berkeley, where I designed the undergraduate track in synthetic biology for bioengineers.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. So let's start off with hopefully a simple question. So what are the typical expectations and trajectories for teaching in both R1 type schools, like, you know, big research programs, and R2 schools that are more undergraduate focused, for both the research focused track and also teaching track, because there might be people in the audience interested in both. And yeah, I guess if you have more specific experience for one or the other, you can speak to your experience with that.
Do we just
I would
go?
say,
Oh, sorry.
yeah.
Go ahead.
No,
Go, Terry.
I'm just going to say very generally, teaching expectations vary wildly. For R1, R2, different departments in the same university can have different expectations. So I think it's just a very good idea to, if there's places that you're interested in, talk to people you know there, or people who know people who know people who know someone who's there.
I can speak to the teaching faculty side. So my job is fully teaching. I do not do, well, I do education research, but it's like for fun. It's like not technically part of something I'm, you know, I don't have funding to do it. I don't really need funding to do it. I just kind of do it on the side. So my job is 80% teaching and 20% service, ostensibly per my contract. I am technically evaluated on scholarship, but at UW, scholarship for teaching faculty doesn't have to mean publishing. It could mean, which I do, and that counts, but it could mean like combing the literature and understanding what best practices of teaching are and helping other people do that. But given that my teaching is 80%, so we're an R1 institution, the tenure track faculty's teaching load is 40%. So if you're interested in a teaching track position or at being at a place that values their teaching faculty in general, the teaching faculty load should not be more than twice that of the tenure track faculty load. Like I teach 5 classes a year. We're on the quarter system. If I teach more than that, I get paid to teach more than that. So I have been doing 6 for the last 2 years, and this year I'll be doing 6, but it's helped cover my summer salary because I don't have grants to do that. And the tenure track faculty here do 5 over 2 years, and I do 5 in 1 year. So I think, like Terry said, like the load is going to vary dramatically based on like the capacity of the institution and like various other things. So as long as it sounds reasonable to you and is not totally disproportionate for different roles in relative to their fraction of teaching, then kind of it is what it is. But I think you can determine if it's equitable, at least based on like the comparison between the teaching track faculty and the tenure track faculty.
I can say a little bit. So yeah, like everybody's been saying, it is very institution dependent, right? So we are, so even though we're technically, right, evaluated on kind of teaching, research, and service, we are paid to teach. And so we are on the hook for 12 units a semester, which comes out to about 4 classes a semester. Almost everybody's goal is to not have to teach that much. And so there are ways that we can get release time, some of it through service, depending on what committees you're on, and then some of it through getting research grants so that we don't have to teach as much. But I mean, so there's a upside and a downside, I guess. So like, you know, if I never get a grant, I still have a job but I just have to teach all the time. But then again, it's trying to find that balance between being able to do research and then having time to actually do that. And so getting some release time to be able to teach.
I don't have much to add. At Northwestern, a tenure track professor usually we're on the quarter system. You teach 3 quarters. That's part of what your 9-month salary pays for. That's usually pretty typical around there for the tenure track.
Awesome. So a common question that people have is how much teaching experience do they need to have or should they have when they apply for different kinds of positions, whether it's a research faculty job or a teaching faculty job?
For a teaching, so I just served on a search committee for a teaching faculty position, and I have a teaching faculty position, so I can sort of speak to those sort of requirements. And I've seen searches happen for tenure track faculty in our department. For tenure track faculty, I don't think the expectation is necessarily that you've like taught a course. It would, in our department at least, it's more like you've obviously TA'd. Hopefully you've done something slightly more than just TA at some point, whether it be guest lectures, undergraduate mentorship counts as teaching. If you've done any amount of work to like learn more about teaching pedagogy, whether that be through some sort of like programs or workshops or various things, that's all great. Ideally, the bar, I think, for tenure track faculty is just like, ideally more than just like, I've TA'd a few times, but it doesn't have to be fully taught a class. For teaching faculty, I applied to a range of positions. The thing that I was actually finding the most difficult for my application was that I didn't have industry experience. And in chemical engineering, a lot of teaching faculty are hired specifically to teach unit ops lab or capstone. And that became a challenge for some of my applications, but I overcame it through having an ungodly amount of teaching experience for someone at my timeline where I had just graduated from my PhD. So I had co-taught a course at Northwestern because that's where I did my undergrad. That's why I know Ashty, and that's why I'm lumped into. I did SynBio once upon a time, but I did a teaching program where I co-taught a class with an instructor. I gave a ton of guest lectures, workshops. I TA'd 3 times separate from that. I did a year-long teaching certificate program where I learned about teaching pedagogy and then also mentored that program the next year. So for teaching faculty, I don't know that it necessarily has to be quite that extensive, but I certainly cleared the bar in terms of teaching experience for someone at an introductory level. If you were being hired at a higher level, obviously it'd be more, but for teaching faculty, the thing that matters more is like sustained and clear interest in teaching and learning about teaching, and you kind of have to seek those opportunities out.
Yeah, I've done hiring for teaching faculty a number of times. It's actually pretty rare at the introductory level that they've been an instructor of record for a course, meaning that, you know, they're the ones who have access to the grades and put the grades in. But typically they would have a robust non-instructor of record teaching experience. They TA'd real classes, you know, classes that I'm like, oh, that TA-ship would be a significant amount of work. They participate with the Center for Teaching and Learning, or whatever that's called at your university. They, you know, like you can get a teaching job only having TA-ships. That's normal, but it is good to have other things to talk about other than I've TA'd these courses.
So I'll say, so I mean, you know, I'm at kind of a teaching focused university. It is tenure track. I had 0 teaching experience, but they hired me. You know, we've gone through hiring recently in the department. I will say that I did during my postdoc go to one of those kind of like teaching pedagogy like workshops to like kind of train you to teach, right? Because I knew that this was the type of position that I was trying to apply for. And so I think that was favorable for me. We kind of, you know, I don't think you need to have taught before, just like everybody else is saying, but it does help on for a position that is kind of teaching focused.
And at Northwestern, at like an R1 place, every department's a little bit different about how they look at your application. And it's holistic in the sense that they look at your research, your teaching, like what types of service you might bring to the university and the community. And based on ratings on experiences in each of those categories, they might invite you for an interview. So you may have no teaching experience and still get invited. You may have extensive teaching experience and your research experience may be at a different level, right? And you may still get invited. So it's very holistic in that way. And there's no, I guess, minimum teaching requirement at Northwestern, at least.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. So the next question is on some pedagogies. And so this, the question is essentially, what are some key approaches or pedagogies that aspiring like faculty members should know about, or maybe like some good places that they can look to learn more?
And maybe I'll start because this is something I've been really excited about in the last year or so. So synthetic biology is not new, but how we teach it and how like there are very few programs that are fully synthetic biology programs that exist at the PhD level. And so how do we teach synthetic biology is an interesting question, being that it brings so many different disciplines together with many different backgrounds. And so what are the key core concepts, right? One way that we as a community have really taught it is really based on tools and methods that exist for engineering biology. And this is where I would say if you get a position or the opportunity to teach synthetic biology, resources to get are in EBRC has their own engineering biology sort of like coursework module that is really impactful in this space. But over the last few years at Northwestern, we've been thinking about, okay, what is the common set of concepts that are in a way timeless for 10 years from now, if we're not using CRISPR and we're using something the next generation in the space of genome engineering, how does that change our curriculum, right? So what are the concepts that remain 10, 20, 30 years from now? And this is where we took inspiration from biology and how biology is taught. And so there's this one figure in your like intro biology textbook that goes from like DNA wrapping around the histones, then becoming chromosomes, and then all the way up to your cells, and the cells become tissues, and then your body, right? This fluid nature of how biological components organize, right? And so we started to frame synthetic biology around this type of organization, from the molecules to the circuits to the cells to the biological communities, and then all the way up to society. So what I would say is when you're teaching, like this framework allows you to get students of all different backgrounds to look into the world, like what are global problems that we could solve with biology? How can we break them down as far as what are the interesting challenges at each of those scales? And then how do we use synthetic biology to bring those back up, right? What do we engineer at the molecular scale, at the circuit scale, et cetera, as we move up? And it's the interfaces between all of these skills that make really cool startup opportunities and technologies. And this is really how we kind of teach it. So Ross put in the chat the paper we just published on the course. And the idea is that anybody could adopt the framework and the materials that we have, and we're interested in sharing it more broadly. Okay, I'll stop talking about that. Others can talk about teaching pedagogy or other ways they teach synthetic biology, but it is something I'm really excited about and would love to talk more about it.
I'm just going to add on to that. Don't reinvent any wheels. You don't get extra credit for, I did it all myself. A lot of my course materials, not synthetic biology, they're on my website. Steal them. Just keep my name on them. It's fine. Have conversations with people about how if you know that somewhere that you want to go it has a particular class that they want this position to teach, talk to people about how you would teach it. That's certainly going to come up in the interview. And you don't have to say, I would design it all myself. Name drop. Like, well, there's someone at Northwestern and I'm talking with them about how they structure this, and there's someone here and there's someone there. Having those conversations and being part of a community of instruction is really valuable. I'm going to circle back just because it's kind of relevant here. A lot of times for instructional faculty in particular, especially in like the first half of the career, there's a lab or capstone. The extremely time-consuming classes are going to be your bread and butter in the beginning, because the research faculty don't want to do them and don't have time to do them. So you need someone there. I taught introduction to tissue engineering lab for 10 years in my first 10 years of my career at Berkeley. And then turned that over to a new instructional professor. So that sort of course design is figuring out what other people are doing, having conversations with them, but first understanding what's the thing they really need you to do and what are the other things that you'll be able to do.
In terms of general teaching pedagogy, I just dropped a giant note in the chat, which I think is categorized by some things that might be useful if you're like, oh my God, I don't know anything about teaching. So there's books, there's like journal articles, and like the same way that you would go to learn about your field, you can go to learn about the field of engineering education and the most like modern practices. And then there's just generally like key terms. If you were to start searching around like Google, there's a ton of resources on these things. Everyone has heard the phrase like active learning, and like people throw it around like it's a buzzword and don't actually know like what, like having really concrete things within that is really important. But if you're like, I really don't know where to get started, I could not recommend enough the book Small Teaching by James Lang. it is so good, and it is designed for people who are busy and do not know how to overhaul their whole class. You do not have to still be an effective instructor. Like, the whole point of the book is like, how can I more optimally use like 1 minute of class time to reinforce learning more effectively for my students? And just having an understanding that things like that exist. And then as you have more time, being able to like do the slightly larger overhauls that are to make your classes more well designed for universal design for learning or various other things, or more inclusive or accessible. But I would just recommend like save that chat message I just dropped and like look into that later if you're just interested in teaching baseline foundational knowledge.
I want to double down on that. When I was with the Center for Teaching and Learning, we were very clear. A lot of times the centers will come at you, right? Like universal design, tear it all apart. And people are like, great, I'm never going to do that. And nothing ever gets done. Iterate, do one new thing every time you teach a class. Just try it. And if you don't like it, that's fine. But don't think that it's an all or nothing. The perfect is the enemy of the good in terms of adjusting and improving your teaching. The other thing that I would note is you're going to see a lot of different things that you can do. And it is good to be exposed to as many of those things as possible, but some of teaching just comes down to who you are and what your style is. So there will be things that work for other people. The evidence says they work for other people. They don't feel right. You don't enjoy them. They don't work for you. Move on. The goal is not to do everything that is evidence-based. The goal is to find things that are evidence-based that really mesh with the courses that you're teaching, the subject that you're teaching, and who you are. I cannot, you can probably already tell, I cannot talk without flapping my hands like a Muppet. That is how in class, I talk with my hands. I'm very energetic. But when people watch me, I'm like, that works for me. If that's not you, I have seen lecturers who are very composed and they use language and tone to emphasize things without flapping their hands like they're trying to take flight, right? And you kind of have to figure out what works for you.
I just want to echo what Terry and Alex has been saying about not trying to go too crazy all at once. I've been teaching a class, this is my 7th time teaching it, and I change it every single time I teach it. And it's drastically different than the when I taught it the first time. To where I am now, I've started incorporating, those different active learning activities, and trying to, redesign my course syllabus to be more inclusive and all these things. But it was like bit by bit. Don't try to do it all at once. I mean, I'm all for it, and I think it has changed, and student feedback has changed. They're all like good things to do, but don't feel like you need to do them all at once, especially if it's the first time you're teaching a class. But yeah, because so I've done things like where I've started just like your standard, just lecture in front of the students, and eventually I've gotten it to now where I flip the class and I give pre-recorded lectures and then do mostly active learning in class. But it took me several tries to get there, so keep at it.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. So now let's get into faculty applications, which I'm sure is on the mind of a lot of the people in the audience. So what are some of the key things that they should talk about in a teaching statement, and what are some typical structures for this?
I could rant about this forever. I will not. In fact, I could rant about this so long, I actually wrote Ross up a document to share with all of you about the structure, like summarizing some key points and things. So in my program where I was mentoring the teaching certificate program for a year, one of my jobs was to edit teaching statements. And now I do that pretty regularly for people. So I feel like I've got a decent handle on like what these should look like. I think my main pieces of advice would basically be the following is like oh, thank you for sending that out, Ross. One, do not do the thing that drives me completely nuts, which is just like have a separate statement for like, here are the classes I've taught, here's how many times I've TA'd, like a teaching background section that is separate from your teaching approach, they really should all be very integrated. It should start with something more like the core pillars of my teaching philosophy are the following, that's informed by these things. And now I'm going to walk you through paragraphs where there are examples of how I implement that, and the examples from your teaching past can be like mentioned and referenced in there. But it's just one, not very useful nor impactful just to list off all the things you've taught, because it doesn't really tell me how you taught. And that is the more important thing. The other like really big thing I'd say is a diversity statement is often required for these things. Don't mention diversity only in the diversity statement, like, or just teaching and like inclusive teaching or various other things in general. Like all that as a concept should be woven throughout all of your statements to some degree. So your teaching statement should be informed by wanting to make an inclusive environment and like how supporting students with different backgrounds and like ways of learning and various other things. So that is my general advice. And the document has a lot more specific things about like the format of different paragraphs that I think is like a very effective framing and way to go about these. And that was the advice I've been giving to people for like years and years and years that I was trained to give. That, and also I saw there were some in the chat that were like, what if I haven't like taught, or like teaching is more than just like standing up there and teaching. It can be mentoring undergrads, it can be leading workshops, it can be like so many other things, that some of which are going to feel more like research, or you're going to think of more like research, but they're still teaching. Communicating your research to a non-technical audience or a different kind of audience than you used to, that's teaching. Communicating your research at all is teaching. So think very broadly about what teaching means and use those as examples, just as you would like when I TA'd this class, I do XYZ with the students, whatever. So anyway, my document with my very long rant in the chat, and I think will be emailed out afterwards. So I will stop. This is the hill I die on, the way that Ashty is with his synbio pedagogy one.
Agreed. I will add, you want to use enough buzzwords that it's clear that you understand what pedagogy is, but then stop. Don't buzzword it up too much, but you should probably mention active learning, right? There are some phrases that are terms of art in teaching, and it is good to signal that you are aware of those. Be specific. This is part of integrating, and part of integrating is if what appears in your teaching statement also appears in your diversity statement, fine, great. Do not worry about that. They don't have to be entirely distinct. But rather than saying, I try to use approaches like this, in this class, I did this. In this other class, I did this. My goal for this class was to do this. You know, like I was focused on improving this. Specificity is the key to narrative. So like drive that home. Do not be entirely philosophic. But when you're being philosophic, be philosophic, right? They're hiring you to be a teacher. In many ways, you will be the face of the department. You may be teaching large lower division undergraduate classes. You might be the first blank they see, the first bioengineer, the first synthetic biologist. So, you know, like, why do you want a teaching physician? And that might not be clear to them from your other materials. The other thing that I would note when you're writing any materials for any job, step back. What do they want to know, right? They want to know you can do the job. They want to know you're not a monster. You will be a good colleague. And they want to know that you are someone who is willing to help fill department needs. Like they need somebody to step in and do these things. That's why they're hiring, particularly with teaching faculty. So understanding like what they're actually looking for. Teaching faculty, in my experience, we don't get nearly as many applications as we would get for research faculty by at least an order of magnitude. So even more than usual, they want you to be the right candidate, right? And you want to communicate that you're going to, you know, come in and support the teaching mission of the department in all of the ways that you are qualified to do, and specifically the ways that they need.
I think they've said it. I don't really have anything to add.
I might just add that it's not really different for a research intensive position either. One of the pieces of advice that I got several years ago about applying is if you don't have a lot of experience teaching, it's hard to really have a teaching philosophy grounded in your examples. So pick the things that are important to you. Like if you don't even know where to start, like what are good teaching practices that you've had in classes, in situations, and then build from those things that you would like to be or like to do, and those experiences, and then your interest, your genuine interest will come across. And I think that's a good place to start.
I'll just jump on. Oh, please go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, no. Oh, sorry, Terry. I guess I'll add one more thing about the teaching statement with regards to structure or format. It should be tailored to the institution. One, at minimum, get the institution name right. I've definitely seen that incorrect on places. That's a great way to be like, well, they don't care about this. But also, it should be tailored to the institution in terms of classes you want to teach. And like the things that you propose should be logical. So for example, I went to UT Austin for undergrad. Some of our class sizes were like 200 people. Don't be like, I'm going to develop a personal relationship with every student. I mean, you can, but like, and I'm going to meet with them all half an hour every week. Like, that's not realistic. And it shows that you don't really have a good understanding of like how different pedagogies or things scale with different class sizes. So make sure that you're not proposing something that's totally infeasible. And a lot of these are very class independent or size independent, but just something to think about is like, what is the typical size at this institution? What is my teaching load gonna be? Like, what is really practical? And then there is exactly one correct answer to when you're asked, what classes do you want to teach? And it is the following. Given my background, and I'm going to use chemical engineering as an example. Given my background in chemical engineering, I'm comfortable teaching any of the undergraduate or graduate core chemical engineering classes, but I am particularly interested in teaching XYZ because you don't want to be like, well, I only want to teach thermo. That is the worst thing you can do to yourself because then they're going to be like, one, they're not going to have teaching coverage, whether you're tenure track or not tenure track. Two, what if someone's already on that? Well, you're not a candidate. So, and you know, you may be pickier than that, and that is okay. It's not a lie to say I'm capable of learning these things, but don't in your statement be like, I hate separations. Don't put me on that. Save that for a later date and try to be a team player and think genuinely about the classes you would be able to teach and be a good fit for and can learn well.
Yeah, I used to do the schedule for BioE, so I would be the person who would be having that conversation. And I would know in my head, it took us years to figure out a once every other year schedule between these two senior faculty for thermo. I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole, right? And if they come in and they go, I want to jump into thermo, I'd be like, great. If they were to go, oh, you know, I could do any of these, thermo is interesting, this other course is interesting, great, I can figure something out there. I just want to add something to what Ashty said. For either research or teaching, if you don't have a teaching philosophy yet, why are you applying to professorships? You need to think about this before you apply, because it will be a big part of your job. It will be a significant amount of time that you spend. And let's be honest, everybody in this room knows what the job of a research professor is. Everybody outside academia thinks your job will be teaching.
It's okay if your thing changes over time, but you should come in with some idea of what is at least important to you, like what Ashty said. It's just like, think about the things that are important to you, and it's okay if your like very specifics change, but yeah, you should. And also, like, for the love of God, please do not be like, I hate teaching and I want this job. Like, nothing frankly makes my job as a teaching professor more depressing than when research faculty hate teaching and then I have to pick up their slack. Like, it's not fair to the department. It's not fair to, like, there are research track positions where their teaching is not a role if you want that for a reason. But you are doing a disservice to your students and to your colleagues if you want a tenure track position, but you abhor teaching. That's my 2 cents.
You're telling the committee and the chair and the vice chair who schedules classes, and I have been in this position, like, I'm good at teaching, but I plan on buying out of those. And then I've been in rooms where the entire committee just goes, okay. And the interview could have ended right then, right? I was deliberately provocative about that. I don't think that you need to have a sort of brilliant, completely crystalline teaching philosophy, but you really should think about this because it's a big part of the job.
Yeah, and you will not be happy in the job if you don't like teaching. Like, flat out, it's 40% of your job if you're R1. And I mean, obviously, please do not apply to a teaching faculty position if you are not committed to teaching every day and that you don't wake up to be like, I live and breathe for teaching. Like, I am one of those people. I'm a crazy person and I get depressed over the summer when I don't have my students and my classes, and that is fine. But if I did not feel this way, I would have quit day one. So it's a lot of work, and I care to put the work in because I love it. But if I didn't, I would not keep going. It's kind of the way people describe a PhD, where you're like, if you don't love the research, you can't get there. Frankly, I had a really hard time in my PhD for that reason. So.
Okay, great discussion. I think we'll go into audience questions now. I think that there was one that was sort of answered already. And yeah, so if you have a question, feel free to just raise your hand or open up your mic and ask it. You can also put it in the chat if you want me to ask it for you. And if nobody asks a question in the next minute, then I'm going to ask a question from the forum. Okay, I'll ask a question. Okay, so this is one about sort of preparing for applying for faculty jobs. So what experiences do you wish you had had when you were preparing, or when you were a graduate student or something like that? It would have helped you in your current role. I think Alex went out of her way on this one, so to prepare.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know that there's anything else I could have done, to be honest, aside from having the literal job. But I can tell you what did help me that I did do, which would be like getting more experience teaching, like the co-teaching role, which may not be available to you, but that's okay. Just go find a professor and say, can I take over a week lecture of your course? Who in their right mind says no to that? We're all like, oh my God, you want to do a week of my class? Thank you. And also we want to help you. We want to help you succeed. So, find someone in your department who's good at teaching and who likes doing it, and just ask them about it, and ask if that you could take over a week of their lecture, or like practice writing a course, give a guest lecture. I always give my TAs the option if they want to do that. I don't make them do it, but if they want, I give it to them. And I also give them the option to give a guest lecture on how their research relates to the course content for courses where that makes sense. All those things will help you. And then, yeah, again, like I said, just like learning what you can to get some baseline foundational knowledge and language for teaching pedagogies, for which I've dropped the resources in the chat. But like every single thing I did prior to getting here has helped me every single day that I've been here. I have no regrets.
Okay, I'll ask another one from the chat, since now we have several that popped up. Thanks, keep them coming. Okay, so Ice asked, do you think teaching will involve more hybrid/virtual tasks in the future?
No, unless the job specifies that. It's a different job. And I think that it is gelling into a different job. I think Zoom meetings are here to stay, and you might do small student meetings for like capstone groups. on remotely, but remote teaching it is really settling into its own thing, and it should be clear from the job description.
I agree. In fact, UW has banned classes from being fully remote unless the instructor specifically schedules and requires that ahead of time. You cannot call something a hybrid class without it going through UW.
Yeah, I will say from my experience here, so right after, the pandemic, when we were all like online, there was this time where people were like, oh, this was great, and when really it wasn't. But and so there was a time when people tried the hybrid where they gave the students options of like, you can come sit present in class or you can do on Zoom, and that required, different technology to be put into the classrooms. The university thought like, yeah, this would be great. But our department has basically said no to all of that because the students just don't learn that way, and they choose just not to come instead. It's not like they're not choosing to be like, oh, offline and attending class on Zoom. They are just choosing not to come. And so, yeah, if there is a like kind of special case circumstance where a faculty like has something going on in their life and they like have to request to teach a class online, then that is given to them. But I don't see kind of online or hybrid things going forward.
Okay, there's a question from Mohammed in the chat. Yes, does it count if a person is already having a lectureship experience at their home country, and does research background also matter? And what if a candidate has both? And I think that this is both for both kinds of faculty applications, but Mohammed, if you want to clarify, you can go ahead.
I'll just say really briefly, I think it has to do with the prestige associated with the institution wherever it is, right? Like that, for good or for ill. I'm not defending that as a system, but I think that's the sort of primary attachment.
Okay, we'll go to the next one. So Aditya asked, do you think international teaching experience is given equal consideration as the US during selection process? And this might be related to what you just said, Terry. But if there's anything else to add to that. Yeah, okay. Duro asked, what surprised you about the position that you didn't expect?
I'll jump in really fast. I came into it thinking, to use a cultural reference that I hope everybody or most people are familiar with, that my job would mostly be performing as Commander Data. And it turned out that half my job was being Counselor Troy. That you are going to have a significant amount of interaction with students at different places in their lives, and sort of managing what is fair and right for their education within the amount of time that you can spend per student, in just a variety of situations. There's a lot of diagnosis that happens in teaching. And it requires a dialogue. One thing that I will tell early teachers is, if a student comes to you in office hours and they can't give you an unambiguous question, that is because if they could state the question that they had in a clear and unambiguous fashion, they wouldn't need to ask the question. The ambiguity in their mind that they are struggling with is the problem. So it's not a matter of simply relating facts back and forth. Like, I do not understand why X is 2. X is 2 for these reasons. It is people struggling with complex concepts and you identifying where the struggle is, and making accommodations writ large, not as the sort of term of art, for students that are going through things that are getting in the way of their education.
I cannot echo that more strongly than I've apparently picked up the code name or whatever in my department, the chemi therapist. I have mixed feelings about that, but it is what it is. And it's somewhat accurate. I have seen so many more things happen to students than I ever could have imagined, because as it turns out, I had a pretty overall privileged experience, and in more ways than I could have possibly have realized, than just encountering the sheer number of people that I have and seeing their life experiences. And there's so much more diversity than just like it's so much more than just race and gender. It's so many things. And I do not have a solution for helping with every like random thing that comes up, but this is part of one, proactively designing your class to be inclusive. It's kind of over time, you'll have to make fewer decisions. I had so much decision fatigue my first year because I was like, oh God, got asked a question like about a situation or how to handle like a weird thing that came up that I didn't immediately like, oh, I've never dealt with that before. Like, I don't know what the answer is. Like, what if the best example I can give you is like someone had a family emergency and was out for 8 weeks of the unit ops lab class. Like, that's a lab class. Like, that's hard to make up that way. I still don't have a good answer for that one. And I'm working on it, but it's hard. So that's one. Two, teaching is a gas. It will fill up as much space as it can as you let it. So set boundaries, a thing I'm not capable of currently, but am working on. I am trying really hard to be better about setting time boundaries and responsiveness time boundaries with students. I'm very much a people pleaser. I love my job, so it's really hard for me to step away from it and from the students, because I want them to be happy and I want them to succeed. But it's not actually always the best thing to answer them immediately, because then you just kind of enable them to ask questions that they kind of know the answer to. And then the last thing I'll say is I've actually been really shocked by how much students have changed. I'm only 30. So the majority, I mean, I have students who are 65, I have students who are 40, but the majority of my students are either like slightly younger than me or like, 18 to 21-year-olds. And oh my God, holy crap. COVID had a huge effect on their math skills. That is jarring. A lot of them don't know how to do like quadratic formula type stuff. And it's very acute. Like I see it in some cohorts and not others, depending on when COVID hit. Through all of them, it's very clear to me that I teach a coding class, and it's really obvious to me that the way that they engage with computers is really different than how I engage with computers, because I was explicitly taught computers growing up, and they have tablets which obscure file storage systems and error messages from you, and they do not understand. So there are just like things that I thought would be easy that are not, and things that I thought would be hard that are not, and it just really depends. So lots of things surprised me.
Yeah, I wasn't going to add anything, but the last thing is students surprising you with their knowledge, or lack thereof, is beautiful in its own way, even when it's in the negative there. But especially in an elective course where they don't have to learn very specific things. The students over the course of this course that we developed here, came up with topics and concepts that we didn't even dream of in our first iteration of the course that are now included, or like expanded our view of what are the concepts that we're teaching. So I think that's been, for me, the most both surprising and enjoyable part of the experience.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I saw there's a few other questions, so.
Okay, great. Let's go to Nicole's question. So what are the experiences, or what other experiences would you like to see from applicants to teaching faculty positions who are not coming straight from grad school? So for example, what other types of jobs and positions postgrads could do to bolster their apps?
Maybe Terry can answer this better because he's got more experience and has hired other people, but I can say from my experience on the job market, my biggest like ding against me, I guess, was that I did not have industry experience, and every single in chemical engineering specifically. So I don't know how much it differs so much by discipline. In chemi, I applied to something on the order of 16, 17 positions. Every single one of them except one specifically wanted someone for either unit operations lab or capstone. And those are both very industry facing classes. And I don't have industry experience. So this department was very kind and took a chance on me. They hired a computationalist to teach their unit ops lab class, which worked out, it's fine. But I do think that there's a lot to be said for like, if you are going into a discipline that is very industry facing and a lot of its students go to industry, and specifically like your very kind of typical industry and not research related industries, then experience in those industries is what they're kind of looking for in their teaching faculty, in addition to like the love and passion for teaching. So that kind of job can help you out, but clearly not required. I did not have that, so.
Yeah, I wouldn't, if you want a teaching position, I wouldn't like seek some other non-teaching position in a strategic fashion. If you have it, I would be just, how do you talk about it? If you're being hired, for example, to run an industry-facing academic program, they may really want and mention industry experience of some kind. But it's not necessary in most cases, although it can be kind of brought up as a bonus. If you don't address it right, it can actually be an issue. You know, like I have 10 years of experience, and I've just decided I want to help you out by teaching, right? I'm like, well, you don't have any teaching experience. You're mid-career, so it's not like you're going to be getting all of your graduate jobs. Why are you, jumping careers now? Like, if it's not explained in the application, it's a negative. If it is explained, it can be a positive. I think it really has to do with how you frame it, particularly regarding coming cold, what they want you to do, like what your job will be at that particular place.
Okay, we'll go to the next one by Laksha. So the question is, in faculty roles involving both research and teaching, do you have any tips on succeeding in both in terms of managing your time effectively? Knowing that spending an infinite amount of time on teaching is impossible, research ends up dropping low on the list. I don't know how to do both well in terms of setting boundaries and managing time.
I'll say yes, it's very hard. I think like Alex has mentioned, like teaching will take, if you let it will take 100% of your time. So I literally will be like, okay, this day is only this, and then this day or is only that, or whatever works for you in terms of like, if you wanted to split it up within each day, this hours and that hours, whatever. I think how you'll have to try for yourself to kind of block out time for certain things and do the best that you can to stick to it. In terms of the teaching, there are so many things that you could do with the class, right? I think, and for starting from the very first time that you're teaching it, you just need to get the content, honestly, and like lean on others who have taught the class before, get the syllabus, like get some course design from other folks to help you and start there. And then make a list as you're going through the semester or quarter or whatever, and be like, I wish I did this. Maybe just write it down, and then when you're coming around the next time, then you can be like, okay, I'll pick maybe this one thing or maybe these two things, and I'll try that this semester, so that you're just limiting yourself to, otherwise you'll go crazy.
I'm going to be very specific and not philosophical. One thing that I will note is preparation, because a class that you've not prepared for takes much more time than a class that you have. So preparation is key. Time is not infinitely expandable. So I don't usually talk about the balance of time. I talk more about how do you preserve your limited teaching time so that you are doing valuable, interesting things rather than, and excuse my French, boring soul-sucking shit, which you want to absolutely minimize, okay? For example, I used to spend so much time explaining why I was grading this particular way to students. And now I have a very clear grading policy. You have a regrade, you send it back to me. We're not regrading it with you in the room. It's not fair. I don't want to have my office hours, half my office hours explaining why that's 2 points off instead of 1.5 points off. That makes the day feel 13 hours long. This preserves the limited time that I have for talking about the material, which I don't mind doing. I really enjoy doing. So I think looking for opportunities to protect yourself. I used to be like, send me some times, we'll figure out a time, sit down. I have open appointment slots. They're 20 minutes long. You sign up for one of them, right? If we need to meet again, that's totally fine. But I have a certain number of these every week. And I don't want to spend a ton of my time when I have many undergraduates trying to figure out a time when I can meet with people who want to meet. I look for ways to avoid doing that stuff so that the time that I'm spending is on things that don't feel awful, right? Because there's parts of it that are not fun. Minimize those as much as possible. It's a systems thing, but it is really useful.
I just want to add, I know we're getting close on time. I want to pick up something that Melissa said, which was about writing things down in lists, like as they come to you. What really, like with the time that you have and all of the responsibilities you have, if you keep things in your head, you're going to be so overwhelmed. So when you have an item that you need to do or something comes up or a surprise here, write it down and build that habit. Then create a system of how you're going to take those lists and get things done and review those lists and go back to it. It's something I'm still struggling with as I'm getting started here in this new role. But there are 2 books that I would recommend. Getting Things Done by David Allen and Deep Work by Cal Newport. And I'm just typing that into the chat that I would recommend reading or listening to. It will at least give you things to think about to create your own system, but it will always be a work in progress, I think, for everyone.
I'll just add real fast. If you're lucky enough to have TAs, delegate. Don't try to do everything. It will drive you kind of bonkers. It also robs them of the opportunity to learn something from the teaching assistantship.
I also dropped some books in the chat about setting boundaries and learning to say no to things. Problems we all have, clearly.
Amazing.
Yeah. I was also given the advice to set goals and pick the thing that you're most interested in improving or working on and make that your goal and put your time towards that. And some things will be left to be not your best work. And then that might change, but follow those things and let those be your guiding.
Perfect. Okay, so thanks to our panel. It was great discussion. Got through a lot of questions and everyone had really great insight and good interactions and sort of feedback. And hopefully to the audience, we're able to provide a lot of great insight for you. I know personally for me, it was very helpful. So thanks from me to the panel, both for coming and joining and also for the insight that you've provided. I think it was very helpful. So we'll sign off here. We'll stop the recording and say, have a great weekend to everyone and see you at the next EBRC event, which I don't know if we have actually one for postdocs and senior PhD students for a while, but whatever. Please retweet or whatever if you see our events and share them with students. We have several targeted to undergrads coming up. Okay. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everyone.